Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program Jason Tam, who's CEO at Nulogy. And today we're going to talk about unleashing agility in late-stage customization. Now, we like to talk about a lot about disruption and transformation and rapid change in supply chain management in general. But if you're a CPG brand, or you're in the contract packaging or manufacturing industries, these trends all too well. Simply put, the rules for success that were valid yesterday are really not valid, anymore today in light of all this rapid change that's taking place in the industry. So that begs the question: and what are these new rules for success? What actions should CPG brands and their contract packaging and manufacturing partners take in order to drive future growth? And what's the role of technology? How can technology help? Well, that's kind of going to be the focus of today's conversation. And it's great to bring Jason to the program, who's in the front lines of this day in and day out, to kind of share his insights and perspective on the industry and what's happening. So, Jason, welcome to the program.
Thanks. Thanks, Adrian, for having me.
So, Jason, you're a first-time guest on Talking Logistics. Now, you and I have known each other for quite some time. I actually had the opportunity to be at your user conference last year, which was great, and it was a great learning opportunity for me. But why don't we, before we dive into this topic, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career path? I'm always curious to learn how and why people got involved with this industry to begin with. So why don't you share a little bit about your story and kind of what your current role and responsibilities are there at Nulogy?
Oh, thanks, Adrian. Yes, so today I'm the CEO at Nulogy. Maybe the question then you're asking here is, what's the genesis of that and how to get to this position? The genesis was I had the pleasure of working in the consumer packaged goods marketplace previously. I worked at Kellogg company. So think of cornflakes, Rice Krispies. That was my life prior, working on the packaging, branding side there, and specifically on the manufacturing there. I jumped to work also in the contract manufacturing for a large multinational billion-dollar contract manufacturer, and I think that was much of the insight that led me to help found and co-found Nulogy. A lot of the problems that were faced at that stage when I was experiencing it, working in consumer packaged goods, was how were we going to mass customize that product but address some of the hyper specialization that the retailers that we were serving at Kellogg were required through contract packagers. And a lot of that, looking at how production was being made, was all very manual. There was no digitalization of these processes, and there was no ability really to collaborate with the contract packagers and contract manufacturers at that point. So that kind of sparked sort of some of the problems and issues and helped me start the company.
Well, that's a great journey, because obviously you've felt the pain yourself, working at Kellogg's and working at on the packaging side as well. And I think a lot of great companies are really founded by recognizing that, hey, there's got to be a better way, right, to how we're doing these things. And I think being an entrepreneur myself, I think that's where you kind of say, hey, you know what, rather than just kind of beat your head against the wall, maybe there's a way that maybe we can help solve this. So that's a great
exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly. a great way to kind of get the journey started there. So let's fast forward to today, right, and start talking about the state of the CPG industry. I mean, when you talk to your customers, what are the challenges that CPG brands are facing today? And I kind of said that yesterday's rules for success are no longer perhaps valid, moving forward. So what are some of these new rules for success then in the industry?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges I think that have really been increasing even from that time that I was working in the consumer packaged goods market, and I've been very had a great pleasure continuing to serve those companies, including Kellogg. So you have today consumer packaged goods companies having to contend with the mounting pressures of retail and really what their consumers want. There is a market today's are becoming more fragmented, and there is many different channels a consumer can get a product. Traditional retail, omni, direct to consumer, and there's an incredible amount of variability that's then driving within that consumer package landscape. What that's requiring consumer packaged goods companies to do is really address the sort of hyper specialization of those brands that they want to bring and launch to market, and to do so in an efficient way. And brands are doing what they do best, which is branding. And they need to rely on an ecosystem of partners, suppliers, including third-party logistics companies, contract packagers, contract manufacturers, to help manufacture, package, distribute that product through those channels in a very hyper-specialized manner. And that agility, one could call agile customization, to embrace that variability of product is really the key differentiating factor for what consumer packages companies to be successful are requiring to do.
Related to kind of that agility, I remember, I had the opportunity to, moderate a panel there at your conference last year. And one of the things that I heard multiple people talk about was just the new product introduction, right? And just kind of how rapid that cycle has to be today versus perhaps in the past, because, consumers are finicky, new brands are emerging all the time from, startups and so forth. So the big guys have to be as agile and responsive in introducing new products and kind of, be able to not only come up with the brand, but distribute it and so forth in a much more efficient and rapid manner than in the past. So I think NPI, new product introduction, is a key part of this as well, right?
No, that's right. I mean, brands today are relying not only on their sort of stable, stalwart brands, but then what is that new product introduction? What are those emerging brands that they can bring into market? And that is where the growth is coming from. So agile customization, or said another way, the ability to customize with agility those products, launch them into market through those various different channels, is truly the competitive differentiator. But there's a lot of challenge with that. There's a lot of complexity, all right, because they have hyper specialized suppliers, they have specialized brands, and that fragmentation not only by consumer demographic but geographic method. And think of you and I and all the different consumers that we have within the markets that these brands, consumer packaged goods brands, serve. That's where the true customization and the complexity is required.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like, again, increased responsiveness, supply chain agility are going to be critical for success, in today's market and moving forward. And you touched upon it a little bit, just now. But then, what are then some of the key hurdles or challenges then that CPG, companies have to overcome to achieve those objectives?
Yeah, there's many different hurdles. I think we've certainly evolved from a world of mass production, where a brand could manufacture one thing many times over and over. Lo and behold, today, maybe that one thing might be only done once. That SKU might be only done for one promotion, might be only done with one contract manufacturer and contract packager. And doing one thing once is infinitely more challenging than doing one thing many times over and over. So that's one element. The other element is collaborating and coordinating and really leveraging an ecosystem of partners to be able to grow those brands that are required to respond to those retail and consumer requirements. So I think that those are some of the two main factors that are required to be responsive. Embracing that variability to be able to leverage visibility within that supply chain to then compete on velocity to launch those products, I think is absolutely critical.
I came out of manufacturing myself, albeit in a different industry in semiconductors, but manufacturing in general, particularly for a lot of companies that are, I would say, have historically been manufacturing centric, right? It was all about, like you said, it was all about asset utilization, right? It was all about kind of setting up that piece of equipment and just running it as much as you can, right? But now in this environment where, you're talking about this, customization, you're talking about being more nimble, maybe shorter production runs, or maybe just a run that might be, seasonal in nature or promotional in nature. You've got that kind of tug of war, if you will, between kind of the, how do you transform, kind of or balance, the manufacturing costs and the ability to set up and changeovers and so forth with this need for being customer centric or responsive to what the consumer wants. So I see that kind of tug of war, happening. And so let's talk a little bit now about kind of the people doing the manufacturing and the packaging and so forth. I mean, obviously they play an important, role here as well in the supply chain of CPG brands. I mean, how prepared are they to meet, these new challenges and customer requirements?
Yeah, I think that in that evolution, there are certainly what we're seeing today, some of the more thought-leading, sophisticated suppliers are the ones that are able to be responsive, able to be collaborative, but it requires capabilities on their end. It requires them to be equipped with sort of the right abilities to share data, also transact and accept information, because data is really the way that these CPG brands and their ecosystem can collaborate on that order. So having the ability to know what is the right inventory, the right quality, the right production, the right quantity, being able to deliver on that specific requirement for that consumer packaged goods brand requires the supplier to be, I think, more equipped on being able to be more responsive in that respect.
There's a lot of talk about, digitization. And of course, if you look at different industries, there are different levels of maturity when it comes to digitization. I mean, where is this industry, today, just from your perspective? Are they, kind of on par with others? Are they a little bit behind the curve, a little bit ahead of the curve? What do you see there?
I mean, we work with many of the leading contract packagers and contract manufacturers and 3PLs across the world, across 5 continents, many different countries, different languages. So that modernization, that digitalization of the supply chain is happening today. If someone said that, you could do this 10 years ago, I'd be like, not really. The cloud wasn't, from a mindset perspective, I think you need to have the foundational components of not only technology, but the mindset to be able to have transparency and visibility. And I think today people are willing to do that and want to do that because they realize that growth is unlocked when that mindset is about sharing, collaborating with my customer to launch these new products, make them better, reduce waste, have better quality of products to market. The underlying architecture, if you will, in Nulogy, us being a cloud-based platform, is I think the perfect sort of stage to play that out. And like I said, that was not available 10 years ago. To have the ability to have a multi-party solution to be able to collaborate across the ecosystem with a brand and a supplier or the suppliers it's something that time is now. So I think that's something that's different.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been writing about for a long time is about, what I call supply chain operating networks, which are really the, bringing together communities of trading partners, connecting them together to be able to facilitate the exchange of data and information and so forth between all the trading partners. And then layer on top of that applications to help, automate and process, the different workflows that have to happen across all the different, trading partners. So I see this as, again, another perfect example of that kind of ecosystem and network-based, environment and processes that can take place here. So kind of building on kind of this technology conversation a little bit. Obviously, like in all industries, technology is going to play a key role here. You've touched upon some of these things already. Obviously, with the rise of cloud computing and network based solutions. You've got things like artificial intelligence and machine learning that are kind of creating a lot of buzz in the industry today. I mean, what are some of the key capabilities that companies should be on the lookout for that are going to help all the different stakeholders in this industry, the brands, the contract manufacturers, and so forth, really move forward in responding to these challenges that we talked about?
Yeah, I think some of the key capabilities are the ability to interconnect with multiple parties, be able to have a mindset of being able to have transparency and visibility, and that digitalization of process, not just having a sort of a system of record that can transact, but really a system of engagement through that process and workflow from to be able to customize those products with agility, I think is absolutely key. Knowing where a product is in its life cycle, from innovation, conception, if you will, or creation, concept, through to order delivery, I think is very key. And because there's so many different, as you mentioned, trading partners, in our terminology, that's exactly right. There's different partners that you will work with that are hyper specialized to deliver that product, I think is very, very important.
Yeah, no, great. Great points there. And it sounds like we like to talk a lot about visibility in general, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to that, right? I mean, there is such a need for that visibility and enabling that visibility. But what I always tell folks is, visibility, if you just think of it as a software application and don't really think about the underlying connectivity that you need to provide the data, to provide the insights, and you don't have a way to really connect all the trading partners to ease the flow and the accuracy of the data and so forth, you're going to have garbage in, garbage out, or you're not going to have any data to really feed that. So I think that underlying network is a key component of this, right?
It is, and like the visibility is not. It's not the end. It's a means to an end, right? The ability to interoperate with some of the leading solutions that are out there. In our case, it's definitely JDA. It is SAP. How do you interoperate with those current leading solutions within that ecosystem of consumer packaged goods companies and suppliers? Leverage that, interoperate, interconnect, and then surface that information to act on that data is critically important. Yeah.
So speaking about acting on that data, so let's talk about a little bit about kind of the benefits, right? I mean, when you look at some of the companies you're working with in, some of the case studies and so forth, I mean, what are some of the benefits that having increased agility and being able to respond, more effectively and do late stage customization? I mean, what benefits are companies starting to experience in this area?
Yeah. So we talked about some of the problems, right? The complexity, dealing with the requirements to have speed to market. So the benefits there is reduced friction, reduced wastes, having a more sustainable supply chain. We've heard about talking about what's supply chain for society, right? So being able to reduce waste, reduce friction, increase sustainability, reduce costs, obviously, and shrink that time frame for which a product is required to get into market. The amount of waste that I think is created is when people don't know when and where their product is in that supply chain that in the past was opaque. If I cannot see what's sort of in the partners that one relies on, then how can I possibly make the right decisions to optimize and to serve my customer? Often is sort of that retailer or that end consumer. So I think that is what we're talking about there, the benefits. And I think we had the great pleasure earlier on this year, a couple of our customers, L'Oreal, obviously one of the largest cosmetics brands, went on stage at one of the big conferences in Arizona and Phoenix, and spoke about how agile customization and their platform working with us was benefiting them to be able to launch those products, reduce waste, and increase a more sustainable supply chain. And more recently, Procter and Gamble did a case study and conversation at the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals at that conference to really highlight how it enabled them to be more responsive with their customers. So I think that those are absolutely some of the benefits: the speed to market, reduction of costs, and reduction of waste.
What I find interesting is that you mentioned a variety of different metrics that can be positively impacted, by this. And I know when I was at your conference, and even the examples you just gave, historically, anything involving supply chain, and particularly in this area, a lot of initiatives are driven by cost reduction, right? And it's not to say that cost reduction or managing costs is not important today, but I think if you listen to those executives that you just referenced, those companies that you just talked about, more and more it's about customer experience. It's more and more about the service dimension that is driving a lot of these innovation or transformation or digitization projects, because it is the whole speed to market, being more responsive to consumer needs, more the ability to eliminate waste, and so forth. So obviously cost has its fingers in all those areas, but it's not the only dimension. It's not the top thing that companies are talking about today. Do you see the same thing?
Yeah, no, I do see that. It's about avoiding those costs or limiting those costs. It's also being able to have growth by launching those products, and having the quality of the products too, through the digitalization of the supply chain, to be able to track and trace those products too. That's exactly what we're talking about. So it's growth on the bottom line, growth on the top line, and it's also the meeting the how do you say, more challenging requirements today in the retail environment. I'll give you an example. So you talk about the metrics: on time and in full, fill rates, everyone's familiar with. But because if a brand and their suppliers aren't able to meet that sort of shrinking windows of fill rates, there's also the avoidance of penalties. And some of those penalties really cut into the ability for a brand to innovate and invest in new product development. And through the ability of having a agile customization platform, that can eliminate and avoid those costs that they often incur by not meeting those fill rate windows and so forth for the retail.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great example there. Well, Jason, we're running short on time here. So, just as a way to wrap up then, I mean, what questions then should CPG brands, ask themselves to assess whether, they have the capabilities in place to become, more agile and responsive in order to succeed in this new market?
Yeah, I think that there's really a set of few questions that both suppliers that are serving the consumer packaged goods companies and also consumer packaged companies have to kind of ask themselves. One is, do I have the ability to collaborate and respond to my customer today? What is required? And do I have the right sort of systems in place to do that? Do I have sort of a best-in-class ability to customize with agility and to interoperate with sort of the systems that my customers have, plus the ones that I have also in-house, that together can digitalize that supply chain that allows a product to go from sort of that concept to that consumer in a very hyper-specialized market that's even more specializing itself and fragmenting itself in the future. So I think those are some of the sets of questions that I would ask myself if I was an executive.
Well, as we, get started with 2019 here, I mean, I think those are good questions to kind of kick off the year with, and to kind of help identify what are the right priorities and initiatives that if you can't answer those questions effectively, that might help point companies in the direction that they need to move into in this new year. So Jason, like I always say, we always just manage to scratch the surface on these topics, but I think we covered a lot of ground today and provided some great insights and advice to folks. So again, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
No, thank you, Adrian. At any time, it's an exciting period to be in supply chain. I've been in a long time, maybe not as long as you, but I would say that this is a very exciting time to be working in supply chain.
Absolutely. It always there's never a dull moment in this industry. That's for sure. I want to thank those of you that joined us today. If you are watching this episode on demand at the Newlogy website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Jason, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. So again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.